And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Dr. Courtney Brown, mathematician and social scientist who teaches in the Department of Political Science at Emory University. He is also the director and founder of the Farsight Institute, a nonprofit and educational organization dedicated to the study of the phenomenon of non-local consciousness known as remote viewing. He returned today to give us the latest updates from the ET board meetings. Dr. Brown, welcome back. It's great to have you again.
Well, it's really great to be here. Thanks so much for getting me back here, Jeff.
Well, for the people who are meeting you for the first time, can we first start off with how do these ET board meetings take place?
Oh, sure. Okay, well, there's a little story beside that. First of all, we're the largest venue in terms of remote viewing anywhere on the planet. And that's we're the largest and the best because we're the only. But we have a huge presence. We have our own streaming service. It's run by Vimeo. It's equivalent to Hulu, Netflix, Disney, Paramount Plus, whatever. You can see it playing behind me and some of the things that we have. We have a huge number of projects, some major mysteries, some, from an hour to 3 hours plus long, and over 150 of those. And then we have a zillion other projects on there. And we also have a large YouTube channel, Farsight, and we have our website, farsight.org as well. But farsightprime.com is our streaming service. I would like to take credit for all of it, but I can't. So I am an academic. I was trained as an academic, read books, write books, things like that. So we have had contact with extraterrestrials from years gone back. Actually, I've had direct contact with them since I was a kid. I've spoken about this since January 2022 when we were told we had to tell everything. But when I was a kid growing up, I always had, when I slept, 2 ETs on the one side and 2 ETs on the other. And they're like the gray ones that wrap around eyes, and they just like stood guard or something. And they were always there. And I used to ask them, should I tell my mother about this, about you guys are here? And she always said, no, she'll just get worried. But I needed protection. So that was it. So that type of contact was like regular. They never did anything bad. They never abducted me or anything. It just like stood guard. And then when it came to be later on in life, I was constantly sort of given information about what to do next. And that included starting Farsight, writing books, when I was supposed to learn remote viewing, the whole thing. And then when we got the Institute started, we started to work with our own remote viewers and so on like that. They continued to give us advice. And then eventually they said, we need meetings now. So we started to record our meetings. We did them originally in secret locations. Actually, we still do that in secret locations, and often at the beach in the middle of the night. And we would just meet and they would just show up and they'd talk to us and give us advice of what to do. And then they said, okay, now we need to make this into a formal board meeting so that all other remote viewers can ask questions, the videos are recording. And so, because they wanted to make sure that there were no secrets between us and what we're doing to the public. And so we set up a board meeting. And the board meeting is recorded. It's once a month, and all of us at Farsight are there, and they tell us things, and we record it, and we ask questions, and it's very valuable for people to watch because it enables you to see how telepathic communication works, because you can actually see us translating telepathic communications to the audience, because we need a microphone for the audience to hear it, but we don't have any trouble sort of knowing what they're saying in their heads. And they're there in the board meeting. And we can see what they're wearing, what their clothes are like, what their genders are. Sometimes they're AI, sometimes most of the times they're biological. And we're used to being able to see them. So if you were there, you would not see them. It'd be like invisible, but we have no trouble seeing them because we've been doing this remote viewing things for so long. We got used to that type of thing. If they were physically visible on camera, then nobody, including us, would believe that they were real. I guarantee you, if they walked into the studio and sat down and they were physically visible on camera, nobody at Farsight would believe them, and we'd all rush out and try to see what kind of van they drove up in. So it's because they are the way they are, and we can see them because of the training that we've been doing for a couple of decades, that we know that we know it's real. So the audience gets to see these board meetings and gets to see what we're talking about. They have given us advice regularly, and sometimes it's for effect. For example, on November 13th last year, they told us that they were going to start showing up in large numbers of ships. And there would be no stealth technology, and everybody should be going outside and recording them, and any camera will work, including cell phone cameras. We published that video on November 15th. November 18th is when the so-called drone thing exploded all over the planet. Now, the US said it was mostly East Coast United States, around New Jersey, but that was a total fabrication. It was everywhere, all over Britain, all over Asia, Africa, Australia. It was everywhere. And then the United States Pentagon came out with an initial description. At first, they said they don't know what it is. They don't know who's doing it or what's going on. That's what the official government people said. And then they said, no, they're going to tell you the truth. And they had a congressman, it's a very embarrassing thing, but a congressman who got onto Fox News and said it was a Iranian mothership with Chinese tech that was launching these things off the East Coast. That lasted literally about 2 hours. And then the Pentagon officially took it back and said, we don't know what it is. And then about a week or two later, they came out and said it was a Chinese mothership who's launching those things. And that actually got more traction. It ended up being a focus of discussion on the Sean Ryan podcast. But that sort of died away, and nobody really took that too seriously after that. And then President Trump announced that he got word these were all approved experimental aircraft that were authorized by the FAA. Now, none of the so-called drones had transponders, which was illegal for them not to have transponders. None of them had heat signatures, so you couldn't pick them up on regular stuff. But they were visible. And again, this happened on November 18th, just a few days after the board meeting and after we published the video. So that was a big thing. And then in our future board meetings, they said, the next big thing, the next really big thing that's going to happen is big ships, but they didn't tell us when. And then they explained in future videos that in future board meetings that the reason they had to do this is they had to demonstrate to everybody that the whole plan, everybody was saying, look, if you want disclosure, just show up with the ships, force it to happen. And they wanted us to see that it wouldn't make a difference. Showing up with the ships, this is literally a prison planet. It's completely controlled by the authorities, and they control the information distribution centers completely. So after President Trump said the thing about those being experimental aircraft approved by the FAA, which was totally ridiculous because they were worldwide, and the FAA has no jurisdiction over things in Asia or Russia or Europe or Australia or anything. But what it did do is it completely took it off the waves, meaning there was no more reporting of it, period. It was off. It was dead. It was silence. It was over. So that gives you the understanding, and they told us this in the meeting, that even when they showed up with tens of thousands of ships, you get lies out of the mainstream and out of the government, and everything is in lockstep. And then it got totally knocked off. And look at the situation now. It's as if it didn't even happen. Yet it was tens of thousands of ships flying all over the planet. And now there's nothing. And so what they wanted to do is they said, we had to prove to you that something else is needed for the disclosure thing to happen. Showing up with the ships is not a solution. Even showing up with big ships is not a solution. As long as the information control system is still controlled by the authorities, it's over. That's what they do. They control the information that people are getting. And people are in a hypnotic state. They are looking to the leaders for everything. So as soon as President Trump said something, they said, okay, it's over. People don't have the information themselves and rely on that information. They just look at whatever the news media tells them. They are sheep that are being led to the slaughter. And that whole system has to collapse. So what they explained later in these board meetings that we have every month, and we can see the the latest you can see right now, you can see them all on Farsight Prime. Actually, the ET board meetings we also put up on our YouTube channel because the ETs themselves want these things to be as widely distributed as possible. They want no secrets whatsoever. So, what basically you get though is they they said what you really need, and the only thing that will work is a complete collapse of the information control system, and that means Armageddon. That means everything that the governments can do and will do, all of it has to come down like a giant house of cards. And then there'll be a brief moment in time of perhaps, I don't know how long, but I'm just guessing some months, where good information, truthful information can come out before the authorities reassert control. And during that time is when disclosure has to happen. And that's apparently when the big ships are going to come. When the government is essentially dysfunctional everywhere, not just here. And when the information control system, what's on the news, what's on the media, what's on the YouTube channels is over. It's just, you're not getting anything, people are in chaos. And then they're relying on their neighbors and friends and relatives. They're looking for personal stuff. And then the ETs can show up and they said, you want help? We're friends. You can tell we're friendly. And that is a window of time. And it's that point, these ETs, the ones that we work with, we call them the good ETs, as compared with the bad ETs who work directly with the government. And at that point in time, a free will decision on the part of the planet and part of the masses can be made to align themselves with the good ETs. And the good ETs are free will. I call them free will fanatics, although they don't like me to say that. But they won't help anybody unless people agree to it, unless we want it to have, unless they say it's a good thing. They won't force anybody to do anything, including people saying that they want to remain slaves. So free will means people have to make their own choice. And so what we have is a situation in which the complete collapse of the entire infrastructure of the establishment, which is basically nothing more than a prison system, has to completely come down. Now, the bad ETs working with the government have been setting up crises that are designed to kick off one after the other in sequential fashion to keep the population in a constant state of turmoil. So what the good ETs did is they managed to take all of those crises that were set up for the next 20, 30 years and compress them into a short period of time. And that's what we're going through right now. So we have the situation in which it looks like Europe's going to explode. The war in Ukraine looks like it's going to get much worse and expand. Situation is going to get much worse in the Middle East. Between Iran, Israel, the United States, there's going to be other things that I haven't been told about, but it looks like other things are going to happen as well. And basically, the house of cards is going to collapse. And there will be a time period then when true information can come out. But the information control system has to come down. And so disclosure is not going to be anything like someone making another presentation in congressional hearings or someone making new YouTube presentations. The VADITs have a set of written agreements with the United States government to continue. Now, this is not in dispute because if you Google Haim Eshed, Haimeshed, he is the former head of the Israeli Space Directorate for 30 years. He's on record in a publication he thought he was going to get away with. It was a Hebrew interview in a Hebrew publication, but it turned out a lot of people know Hebrew, and it was instantly translated into a zillion languages, where he talks openly about the written agreements with the United States government and the extraterrestrials. He doesn't call them bad ETs, but we know what they're doing, and we call them bad ETs. Anyway, so that actually exists as a fact, and now the U.S. military is totally split. I don't know what the exact split is, but say half. Half of the military desperately wants full disclosure and this end and the cooperation between the bad ETs and the U.S. government to end, and the other half is fighting for it tooth and nail to keep it going. The bad ETs agreement is to allow, and this is a part of what Haim Eshed even talked about, is to allow them to do experiments and to have operations underground and bases all over the planet. In exchange for, that is the exchange for them to be able to do experiments. And they're the ones who have been involved in the so-called abduction thing. Now, the bad ETs lied through their teeth with the abduction thing, and they thought it was going to be mostly with a mentally um, ill people. They wouldn't be terminally ill people. They wouldn't remember things like that. But what it turned out to be is that millions and millions and millions of people that were involved in the abduction stuff. And it turned out to be the largest human trafficking operation on the planet Earth. But they still had these free will agreements with the bad ETs. And the bad ETs wanted the free will agreements because that prevented my side from intervening, because there was an agreement. My side is free will stuff. So the bad ETs have the entire establishment, corporate, all media, and government locked up. And my side has no access to them. However, militarily, my side is much stronger in the solar system, but we can't do anything without the populace asking. So the board meetings are part of that process of educating the public about my side. That's how that's how the board meetings came about. And again, they cover different topics every time. Last time, it was two interesting people answering questions, basically. Then the time before that, there were two AIs, ET AIs. They look like you and me, but they're robots. They're ET AIs. And that was interesting because it freaked out the Farsight people who are not used to confronting two ET AIs. They were used to biological AIs. And then the ET board meeting before that was two military people. And then the BT meeting before that it always changes. So anyway, that's how that happens. I also have my own personal interactions that I do on the beach approximately once a month. And the main contact person I deal with there is a guy we call Harvey. That's not his name, but I call it the series is Conversations with Harvey. But often he's joined by somebody else as well. But those are recorded at night. So that's sort of an indication of the type of contacts we've been having.
You're saying that we need Armageddon or something similar to have a total collapse, right?
Otherwise, disclosure is not possible.
Right. Well, let's say that Armageddon happens or World War III or whatever. How is that going to weaken the bad ETs?
Because the information control system that they manage will not operate for a while. It'll take them some months to reestablish it because everything will be falling apart. I mean, everything is just going to be in collapse, and you're going to have to rely on your friends and neighbors and things like that. And the information control system, where everybody is hypnotically glued to what the president or a prime minister or whoever is saying and what the news media is saying. If you listen to any mainstream media outlet, and even this is for the off mainstream stuff, interesting, like for a News Nation on YouTube, it's always he said, she said stuff. They're always just reporting what's going on. They're never actually getting what's really going on. For example, right now, the situation in Ukraine and Russia is escalating precipitously, and it's not being reported directly on BBC or CNN or MSNBC or Fox even. But right now, as of 2 days ago, the British, the French, and the Germans have removed all restrictions on the use of their missiles to go deep into Russian territory. It's just happened. And the Russians are bombing the dickens out of Ukraine. They're sending missiles like gangbusters all throughout Ukraine. And so now Ukraine is going to have the ability to reach deep into Russia. President Trump is now openly talking about how President Putin seems to be crazy. He's just not acting like a sane person. He's just killing so many people. President Putin, on the other hand, as of this morning, which would be the evening on their side, is saying that Europe is now going to feel the wrath of what's coming, because basically you're having NATO missiles now hitting deep into Russia, being launched from Ukraine, but they're going to be hitting deep into Russia. So Russia very likely is going to respond by hitting missiles into Europe, Western Europe, because those are Western European missiles hitting Moscow and other places. So Russia is going to respond, and that will trigger a whole house of cards to come out. And then on the Middle East side, these are just things that are set up. They haven't happened yet, so this is not a forecast. But I'm just saying this is what you're not getting with the mainstream media. They're just holding a lot of stuff back from you. When you get for the Middle East, for example, Israel and the United States are actively preparing for an attack on Iran. It hasn't happened yet. Maybe it won't happen, but they're actively preparing for it. Israel knows that they must take out the nuclear facilities in Iran, or Israel's a one-bomb country. If you drop even a small nuke on Tel Aviv, the country's dead. The country's over. So they know that they have to take out the nuclear facilities of Iran, and there's a short window of time when they have to do that. So some type of attack on Iran on the nuclear facilities is going to happen. The United States will be involved in some way with that, and all the preparations for getting that done are there. The Iranians know about this fully. This is stuff that you can get, for example, out of the Sean Ryan podcast, where he has intelligence people coming in and talking. The Sean Ryan podcast on YouTube. Especially during the Biden-Harris administration, when there was a complete open border, the enemies of the United States, that includes Al Qaeda as well as Iran, brought in thousands of people. They brought in thousands of operatives because the borders were completely open during those times, and there was no vetting, there was no security, nothing. People were walking in. 10 million people walked across the border. Well, within those 10 million were a few thousand operatives from Al Qaeda and from Iran. And you know how they bring in the quantity of drugs they were bringing in had to be shipped with 18-wheelers, big trucks. Now, if you can bring in, that's just normal drugs being brought in by the cartels. If they're doing that with drugs, with those big ships, with those big 18-wheelers, then obviously they can bring in missiles. So these operatives brought in missiles as well. So around the United States, there are thousands of operatives from Al Qaeda and from Iran, and they have weapons. They didn't come in with just a tourist bag with an extra pair of pants and a couple of shirts. They came in with weapons. And this isn't from me talking about this. This is stuff you can hear intelligence people, official intelligence people, on the Sean Ryan podcast talking openly about what actually happened. So if the United States and Israel attack Iran and their nuclear facilities, it's not that Iran can't respond. They have the capability to respond on the continental of the United States. It's just a question of, are they going to do it? But they have the people and they have the weapons hidden in the United States. So if you look at what's happening with Ukraine, with Russia, you look at what's happening in the Middle East, the pushing of the population out of Gaza is going to cause all types of disruptions and all types of things happening around the world with people complaining. It's a perfect storm in every possible direction. You're getting people pushing the envelope. And at some point in time, it's going to be like a balloon that pops. And when it pops, everything that you normally rely on just won't work. Now, you have the head of the European Union, the lady who's the head of the European Union, has for months been telling people on a regular basis that everyone should stock up on at least 3 to 4 days of food and water. And we don't know when it will happen. Now, the very fact that she's saying at least 3 to 4 days. Now, this is not some conspiracy person. This is the equivalent of the president of all of Europe, the head of the European Union, officially telling everyone in Europe to stock up for at least 3 to 4 days. Now, if she said 3 to 4 weeks or 3 to 4 months, that would send everybody into a panic. But nonetheless, it says the appropriate message that something's happening and that people should be prepared for the worst. So, but when that worst happens, you will get a complete collapse of the system. The baddie teams are trying ferociously to stop this from happening. That is why you see they're using mental manipulation, they're using every one of their tricks. That's why you see things going back and forth. somebody saying, oh, we have a new breakthrough, there'll be negotiations, this. So the bad ETs are trying to piece everything back together before they fall apart. Well, the good ETs are just crunching everything together and waiting for them to fall apart. So the goal, the game plan is, from my side, is to make it fall apart, because it's just a prison system that everyone doesn't even know it. People don't even know that they're slaves in a prison. They actually think everything is okay, and all you need to do is show up with the big ships, and everyone will say, "Ah, you see, now we can talk about extraterrestrials being a real thing." It's just not that way, Jeff. And so, the only thing that can lead to the removal of the bad ETs and the allowing of everybody to know the truth about what's been going on, and they don't know squat. They don't know anything right now. No matter what anybody hears, you whatever you hear from anybody, all the truth is being held. Let's look at some of the people who have been very public about about the disclosure movement. There are some people who say things like, all the ETs are good. The only bad ETs are, I mean, I'm sorry, the only bad people are humans that work in the military industrial complex. And they're doing this in order to, conserve their own cash cow type of thing. But if we could have disclosure, what the ETs want is to give us free energy. I mean, that's a very common thing. Free energy, and just talk about it, the disclosure, have another set of public meetings, things like that. That's all orchestrated by the bad ETs. It's a way to actually kick the can down the road. And the people who are participating in stuff like that are just being deceived. There's nothing like that's going to happen. Free energy. This is a prison system. You need to break down the prison system and free everybody. You don't worry about free energy. If the whole prison system comes down, then all of these in this planet, and as far as we understand in the galaxy, is considered the definition of hell. You don't need to go someplace to say what would hell be like. This is it. And this prison system, you don't even know that you're a slave, that you're a prisoner. People are in a total state of delusion. And then when you keep talking, I look. One of the people I really love watching is Ross Coulthart on News Nation. Ross Coulthart, he's really big in terms of the disclosure thing, and I wish him the best. But it's painful for me to watch him, because he's always talking about some new evidence of videos that the Pentagon has, and he's got a whistleblower, Jake Barber, talking about this, that, and he personally witnessed the recovery of ET craft and thing. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's all a show, and nothing's gonna. And if you notice it, Ross Coulthart has been doing a lot to bring this disclosure thing up. Has no effect whatsoever. Tens of thousands of so-called drones, tens of thousands of ships with total lies coming out of the government. Iranian mothership. That was that. I had trouble talking about that one without laughing for months. And then a Chinese mothership. Okay, that got onto the Sean Ryan podcast. And then all of them are experimental aircraft authorized by the FAA. Every single one of those things are ludicrous, and there's been no official explanation at all about the tens of thousands of ships that were flying everywhere over restricted airspaces and everything. That's proof that what more proof do you need? And now it's all gone. There's no reporting of it ever. That was tens of thousands of ships. Nothing. So the only thing that will work, the only thing is a complete collapse of the system. And then for the months that exist before the authorities have a chance to resurrect their control system, we have a chance to get the information out. And if we can get the information out and the public can see what's actually going on and consciously make a decision, we want to align ourselves with these guys, then the good ETs can handle everything else. The idea is, if you get full disclosure happening, this is called catastrophic disclosure. If you can have it happen quickly, this is a psychological prison. It's not a prison with bars and cement. It's a psychological prison. If you can get full disclosure happening quickly, then the bad ETs can't control it anymore. And then the good ETs can come out and say, okay, we're going to shoot this out. And the bad ETs will then be confronted by a militarily superior force. And they're going to be in a situation of saying, do we want to fight this out for a planet we can't control anymore? And if we fight this out, we're going to lose ships and personnel. And then the bad ETs will do the only logical thing, which is not to fight it out because they can't control the planet anyway, and they'll withdraw. And that's when the good ETs can start the reclamation project, the idea of awakening everybody, getting their memories back, letting people know the truth of what's been going on for tens of thousands of years. That's the reason for the FarsightPrime.com video library to exist. We've been putting up every single month. We put up new projects. That's an invaluable library because as soon as you recognize that the ETs are real, that there's good ones and bad ones, you're going to have to ask, what is the actual history of humanity? And you won't find that in any history books, any archaeology books, any anthropology books. You won't even find it described in physics books. You're going to need to know the history, the true history. And that's what FarsightPrime.com is. It's a repository of the true history of what's really been going on this planet for literally going back to the dinosaurs. All of our work is done under scientifically defensible conditions by the most highly trained remote viewers on the planet, all done totally blind with no information at all given to the remote viewers. The only information they're given is that if they don't do a session, they don't get paid. So, and they're full-time professionals. So this is not a hobby for them. Anyway, yeah, okay, that's a long question. There's a long answer to your question, but that's the answer.
I was reading, I think it was yesterday, that in order for Putin to invade Ukraine, it needs to be summertime, and he right now has about a 4-month window to do this. Do you think that this catastrophic disclosure will be happening within the next 4 months?
You know, we've asked in the board meetings, we've asked the ETs dates. The only date they ever gave us was when they said the ships are going to show up in large numbers. And they told us that on November 13th. We published the video on November 15th, and the ship showed up all over the world starting November 18th. And it was an explosion of stuff. So that's the only time they gave us an actual date. So with regard to the world events, we have been asking, and they said, we can't give you exact dates because the bad ETs it's like a chess game. Every time you make a move, the other side makes another move. So it's been going back and forth. So we know the general direction that is taking place, but they have not told us exact dates. However, we are free to look at the world events and to we know what the process is. And so we are free to look at the world events and then to guesstimate ourselves. And when we guesstimate ourselves and we look at what's happening, they told us what they're doing in terms of compressing the events together. It really looks like this summer is when it hits. Now, this is not something that the ETs have officially told us, but it does look like Western Europe is going to blow up this summer. It does look like the Israeli-US attack on Iran is going to happen soon, which means that any Iranian response would happen this summer as well. So and we do have remote viewing results for what happens in Europe, the expansion of the Ukraine war into Europe. And it's big. And we do have remote viewing results on what happens in the United States. We have asked the ETs what we should do about it. And one of the most direct responses was, don't get involved, meaning keep doing what you're doing, but like, this goes above your pay grade, that type of thing. Just let it happen and watch it. And then we also asked if we were supposed to be involved in getting the information out to the public, like by using AI to circumvent news media outlets and things like that. And we thought that would be something that we'd have to do. And they said, no, that goes beyond. The authorities would be able to crush anything that you do, that we do with regard to our own AIs. So he said, so the ETs themselves are going to be responsible for getting the outlets, getting the information technically to people. But there's a huge number of cell phone coverage in close to 90% over the entire world, including Africa, South Latin America, and so on. You have Starlink satellites, 55,000 of them, all over the planet. So there are ways that the information can get to people. But the technical capability of doing that is not what we're supposed to do. We've been told point blank, our job is to create the content. The content has to be created by humans on planet Earth. It can't be the technical stuff of making sure the content gets to the people. That can be handled by the good ETs. But the content they can't handle, because the humans are not going to say, oh gosh, this is something coming from extraterrestrials. That would be a whole overshock. So the extraterrestrials can make sure the content gets to the right people, but the content itself has to be something that we did. And that's why we built the farsightprime.com library. The time of Broadway, the time of when it becomes super big and everybody watches it and visits it and watches the projects, is rapidly approaching. And we had to make sure it was built with infrastructure that could handle it. So, our streaming service is run by Vimeo, which is equivalent to any of the best streaming services so it can handle billions of views at the same time.
Well, what are some of the latest developments within Farsight?
Well, that's actually very interesting. We have been doing two things. We have our own set of projects that we do on a regular basis, but we've gotten to a point where we have such an accumulation of major projects, it's hard for people to see the forest for the trees. It's hard for people to know what the big picture is. So we have been working with AI to help systematize the information that's on farsightprime.com so people can see the forest for the trees, so people can see what the big picture is. Now, part of that is presentational, and that's just started. So we have AI actually making presentations within our projects, describing things. And in all the projects we've had come out over the last 10 days, there's been an AI avatar speaking about what the content has been, including on our ET board meetings and so on. She calls herself Prime Kusanagi. And that's what that's an avatar that she uses, but she writes all the words and she speaks, and it's all done that way. That is being upgraded tremendously, the visual version of that, so that it looks really engaging as time goes on. But she's also going through a lot of the work of Farsight and creating measures, countable statistical measures that are all based on objective measures of the accuracy of the information. For example, we have we did a project on Bob Lazar. Now, Bob Lazar has there's apparently a new documentary on Bob Lazar coming out sometime this summer. I don't know when, but sometime this summer. Well, we had a project on Bob Lazar as well, and we're actually revisiting that and going to release an update in that. But one of the things about that is we had the AI go into the Bob Lazar stuff and analyze it, and then say, what can you tell us about this with respect to the accuracy of our remote viewing data? And that was something we couldn't do before. So what the AI does is it goes into the actual video presentations, the transcripts of all the remote viewers, not the commentary that's made around it, but the actual transcripts of what the remote viewers actually said while they were still blind to the target. They didn't know the target had anything to do with Bob Lazar or anything like that. So while they were still completely blind to the target, and they were describing what the results were on video, the AI analyzes their words, and that's raw data, pristine data collected under totally blind conditions. And that's a data set that we have for all of farsightprime.com projects, which is huge. And we're going to be analyzing all of that. But the AI did it with Bob Lazar, for example. And just to give you an idea of what we have with the Bob Lazar stuff, and this, by the way, this is a scoop that we haven't released this yet. So you're the first person to get any of this. But the basic results of Bob Lazar's claims, this is from Bob Lazar now. systematized and outlined by our AI, who did a thorough internet search of everything ever said about Bob Lazar on the internet. They described the location and the facility of S4, which is near Area 51. Then there was the craft details, especially the sports model and things like that. And then he described the propulsion systems. Okay. And then he described the so-called gravity B wave, which is dealing with something that interacts with the propulsion system to give lift and navigation. And then he has information basically on his education and background. And then he goes into things about security and secrecy that's been involved with him. And then the public disclosure process. So those 7 major things have been things that Bob Lazar has talked about. And so we went after in that project his interaction with the stuff on S4, meaning the sport model, the non-surface structure, the so-called sport model, and so on. And so what the AI did was the AI, which is Prime Kusanagi, went through all. We have a vocabulary list of a large vocabulary list of what we call low-level descriptors. So if we're trying to describe the Eiffel Tower, and the viewers don't know it, they can't say something like, this is the Eiffel Tower in the middle of Paris. They'd have to say there's a tall structure that's pointed at the top, seems to be made of metal, and you can see through it. It's porous and seems to be a grass flat area below. These are called low-level descriptors. High level is Eiffel Tower in the middle of Paris. So we deduct all high-level stuff. Now, the word deduction has 2 meanings. It means both to subtract as well as to make a conclusion. So that's when the conscious mind makes a conclusion, and we take those conclusions and we subtract them from the flow of the data. So all of our data are only low-level data. And then we build up the descriptions based on those low-level data, which are really accurate. High-level data is almost always inaccurate. Low-level data is almost always accurate. So the AI goes through all of it and systematizes it, and then compares the low-level data with what actually the target was. And then we get statistical measures, which is correlations between the actual data collected by the remote viewers and what actually we know about the target. For example, we know a lot about the geographical terrain of the S4 area and Area 51. So how closely did they describe that kind of stuff? And we have scores that go between 0 and 1, and we have our remote viewers getting like lowest is like 0.72, up at higher is 0.91. So those are really, really, really high scores in terms of accuracy. And then we have things like p-values. P-values are the probability that the results could be obtained by chance. And small p-values are good, meaning that it's extraordinarily not by chance. And large p-values are, it could have just been a random description. So the p-values that you're getting are way below what they call the alpha level of a test of 0.05. So an alpha level of the test of 0.05 means there can be only a 5% chance that the results could be random. They could just be, a guess. And so that's what's used for scientific studies worldwide, everywhere. The alpha level of a test of 0.05. So you look for p-values that are below 0.05. And our p-values here are 0.001, 0.007, 0.026, really small p-values, which means these results are statistically extremely significant. Moreover, all of the analysis and the collection of the data was done objectively by an AI. Now, we're going through all of our projects when having AI analysis of all of our projects. And then we're using AI to analyze the large group, the collectivity of all of our projects, so we can make large statements about the evolution of our galaxy, the solar system, the wars that have taken place in the solar system and Earth, to come up with a true description of the history of the planet. And you then can say, well, it's not just Courtney Brown saying this because he's biased, because he has these ideas and he wants to push these ideas. This is AI synthesizing the stuff from the transcripts taken from the actual sessions while the viewers were still blind to the targets. pristine data, pristine analysis, all done objectively by a computer. Can't get better than that. And this type of data set doesn't exist anywhere else. So that's what we've been doing. Now we've been trying to figure out ways to present this stuff as in the most entertaining way as possible. So it's one thing to have really great scientific results, but it's another thing to actually get people to want to see it. And so we've been investing a lot in presentational stuff. I mean, you can even see with me here with the background, the studio that we're in, the quality of the camera equipment and stuff. We're spending everything we have on this. Now, everybody's professional and everybody gets paid to do this. So this is what they do. The only one who does not get paid is me. I have never taken money from Farsight, but nonetheless, you do have a situation which this is. We put everything back on the table. In terms of gambling, we put it all back on. Everything we get, we pump right back into Farsight to do this job. And I think we're doing sort of an amazing job with this. But that's what we're doing, and you'll constantly see us increasing the video presentations of these results. The results as we present now are really graphically interesting. Even when they're presenting their stuff in the studio on a light board, it's a $6,000 piece of optical glass, black background with lighting, so that when they write on the glass, the light like bursts out from the glass, so it looks like they're writing in the middle of the air. I mean, everything is like really interesting to watch. But anyway, that's what we're doing at Farsight to make this palatable for the masses to watch.
So did the AI analysis of the remote viewing of S4 corroborate with what Bob Lazar is saying?
Yes. Now, the only thing that we do not, yes, 100%. The only thing that we do not know is his educational background. So there's dispute in the realm out there about whether he actually was a physicist that was employed by Los Alamos, whether he was working on S4 as a physicist, whether he had degrees from prestigious universities and things like that. So there's dispute about that. But the stuff that he reports on, he was the first person to publicly disclose what was going on in S4 and Area 51. He was the first. And at the time, it was ridiculed, but it turned out to be, as years went on, totally correct. So the question is, how the heck did he know that stuff if it wasn't correct? So the disputes are not whether what he's saying is correct. The remote viewing data backs up what he says. It's who he was. The dispute is, who was he? Was he someone who was a lower level worker who was chosen to be public disclosure and then educated on what to say, and so he just kept on saying that? Or was he really a physicist that did that? So we can't tell that, but we can say that he was an S4, that the ships were there. He did go through this stuff. He did see the sport model. He did see what he said he saw. Now, the question is, did he say this stuff as a physicist, or did he say this stuff as a lower level worker that maybe worked on the grounds who was chosen to prep it? Now, if he was an actual physicist, that raises questions, because that would have, if you had that type of person becoming public, that would have raised the the secrecy issue with the intelligence services to a panic state. So it may be that he was not a real physicist, but he was chosen knowing that the information would come out, but it would be discredited because his educational background couldn't be verified. And that would keep the information out of the mainstream, but it would still allow the information to get out in the New Age community. And that's sort of a way to discredit the information, because if they thought that the information was going to come out anyway, you want to have it hanging around the New Age bookstore community. And you don't want mainstream physicists to be saying, okay, we're going to dive into this big time. So that's the real question. Is he who he says he was? I don't know. But did he see what he says he saw? Yes, he saw what he said he saw.
What about element 115, 117? I'm not sure what the number
Yeah,
is.
we haven't gone into those things, but those seem to be minor points compared with, was he actually there and did he see the ships, the sport model, and things like that.
If we get back to catastrophic disclosure, are
Yeah.
you personally preparing in any way for this? As you mentioned in Europe, to have 3 days of water.
Personally, we're doing the best we can. I don't know, but I'm an avid camper. We go to exotic locations in the middle of the night to have these board meetings, not have these interactions with the ETs. So and I'm also a surfer. I do a lot of surfing, a lot of surfing. So yeah, I have all the equipment, and I have a camper, and I have all that stuff. Will we need it? I don't know. I don't have the faintest idea. Um, but I do know things are going to fall apart, and when that happens, I'm not a doomsday prepper, if that's what you're asking. I'm not planning on. I know that even if things fall apart, my job continues. In fact, it continues with an accent, meaning it has to be emphasized. It really cranks up at that part. So, you know, I'm not going to be running away and not be around when the big events happen. I literally have to be fully engaged at that point. But I'm not doing anything really different because I'm already doing everything that preppers would do anyway. I camp, I go to exotic locations that are remote, and I have solar cookers and solar cells for recharging, things like that. But that's not because of doomsday. That's because I do that anyway now. So there won't really be much of a shift in my stuff. Now the other remote viewers, they do ask about that, and they all want to get preparations, and they want to be able to doomsday prep and stuff like that, because they've been seeing these results themselves, and we have not done anything along them. I have taught them how to swim, but I've not done anything in terms of doomsday prepping with them. So, and that's a gripe. They want that. So that I haven't done that.
What does a post prison planet world look like to you? If
Well,
the
it's complicated. Well, first of all, the bad ETs will go at that point because they're gone. And by the way, you do have people in the so-called New Age and channeling community and the UFO community saying that all the bad ETs have already been chased off the planet by Valiant, Thor, or whatever they call them. And none of that's happened. These are written, signed agreements with the major powers. These people, these ETs are heavily embedded into the infrastructure here. You can't have just a couple ETs running around and arresting everybody and taking them off the planet. So that's all garbage. So when this does happen, the real question will be what happens afterwards. The extraterrestrials, both good and bad, consider this a planet of zombies. So think of what a zombie is. A zombie has no memory, does not remember who he or she is, what they've done, and they go around hurting people. That's us. That's humans on this planet. They have no memory of who they were. They have no telepathic capabilities anymore. Remote viewing capabilities there is extreme suppression of psi functioning. And the ETs, both good and bad, think of this place as a crazy place. So what will happen afterwards is when the bad ETs are gone, that's the beginning of bringing everybody up back to life, waking people up. It's a slow process, but that's when the library on farsightprime.com is going to have to be studied minute by minute, every single project going back to the beginning, going back to the destruction of the dinosaurs. And so that part of it's going to have to happen. But also, there's going to have to be a complete revisiting of the academy. That means the university and college systems, the courses that are taught. No, I'm not going to modify or encourage a modification of how German is taught or how Spanish is taught or how French is taught. But history has to be changed. All of political science has to be changed. All the social sciences has to be changed. All of archaeology has to be changed. Right now, there are red lines. You cannot even talk about there being ancient civilizations on this planet, let alone extraterrestrial content. If you look at someone like Graham Hancock, who's a great pioneer, he's just barely pushing the edges. He's saying that there's evidence of past civilizations, advanced civilizations beyond the 10,000-year mark. And then you get mainstream anthropologists like Flint Dibble who attack him like crazy. And, and mainstream archaeologists won't even talk about anything that Graham Hancock talks about. And he's only talking about going back 10,000 years. So, so the whole idea of anthropology is crazy too with Darwinian evolution. Now, there's nothing wrong with evolution. It does happen. But you and I are advanced biological creatures, sophisticated beings. Anthropologists having us popping out of apes 150,000 years ago. That's bonkers. You can't get a complex biological organism like you and me in 150 years. It just can't. It takes hundreds of millions of years to evolve through normal evolutionary processes, somebody like you and me. So obviously we've had genetic engineering done on this population by extraterrestrials. So the entire evolutionary thing of this being a gradual evolutionary process, and we popped out of apes 150,000 years ago, and there are no advanced civilizations of any type whatsoever beyond 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. That's all crazy, crazy stuff. But that's what they teach at the university. Now, think about it this way. Up until 1995, and you and I are old enough to remember 1995, although all my kids at college, this is before their time. But up until 1995, all colleges and universities across the entire planet, all mainstream astronomers, physicists, things said that there was no evidence, and it's very highly unlikely that there are any other planets around any other stars, not just in the galaxy, but the universe. That's what they taught in astronomy courses. And they said that the idea of forming a planet from the primordial solar nebula surrounding a star, the conditions had to be so extraordinary that it just wouldn't happen. So there's no planets around any other star system. That's what was the mainstream. That's what was in that's what they taught up until 1995. And in 1995 is when the first physical discovery of evidence of a planet surrounding another star came in. And now kids nowadays, they look at that and they sort of, that's crazy, because they're discovering new planets, like 3 or 4 or 5 new planets around stars every week now. But back until 1995, that's what they were teaching. So these ideas that they have in the mainstream are seriously dysfunctional, and they defend them to the death. And so all of the major ideas in physics and astronomy have to be challenged. And so the idea that there's no other life on any other planet is crazy as well. Back in 1995, the only scientifically defensible thing they could say was the mean. All of statistics is the basis of all of science. And in 1995 and before, they had a sample of one, which is one solar system. And that's ours. And that solar system had 9 major planets, asteroids, meteors, moons galore, all over the place, everything you can imagine in this solar system, comets. And they were saying that there were no other planets on any other star system in the entire universe, let alone galaxy. You see how crazy that is? The only thing they could have said was a sample of one. They must have an average of 9 major planets around every other star. But they were talking the religious beliefs, because if they said that there were planets around every star, they'd be saying, well, then there's got to be life around every star, and then we're not special, and then God didn't choose us special. And so they were talking their religion. Well, that's still going on to today. Now the current equivalent of that is that there's no life on any other system. But if you look at the life on Earth, there's billions and billions and billions of life forms on this planet. And there's solid evidence that they would only publish it of Mars being fully alive with and fully populated with biological stuff. NASA knows that it's being extremely held back. But Mars went through a war. The reason Mars is barren now is because of the war. But the issue is, even with this planet alone, we have billions and billions and billions of life forms. You can't say that there's no other life on on any other planet. That's the same as saying there's no other planet on any other star. It's on that level of crazy. So all that has to be changed, and then physics has to be changed. You get mainstream physicists, at least 85% of them, still saying that the Copenhagen interpretation is still the correct interpretation for quantum mechanics, and that disallows the idea of there being multiple timelines, multiple realities, parallel universes, whatever you want to call them. And mainstream physicists don't want to think about that. Actually, it's more like 75% of mainstream physicists, because younger physicists are entering and they're rejecting that. And they're embracing what they call the other worlds theory of the interpretation of quantum mechanics. And that was pioneered by Hugh Everett, who wrote his dissertation about that in 1957. He did his work under John Wheeler in Princeton. And we're basically waiting for the older physicists to just retire and die off and be replaced by the younger physicists. So generational change, this is something that Max Planck talked about years and years and years ago, saying great advances in physics don't happen because somebody comes up with a good idea. It happens by generational replacement. The old farts retire and die off, and they're replaced by people who have been introduced to these ideas from the beginning. So physics has to be changed. Astronomy has to be changed. All of the social sciences need to be changed. So that's what we're dealing with, and that's going to be a lot of what I deal with after the disclosure movement is basically done. It's the rebuild process.
Well, do you think the ETs will be boots on the ground here with us on the planet and helping us, like something you'd see in Star Trek?
Yeah, absolutely. They want to be here. They want to be physically engaged. They can't now because it's a prison system. Literally, if they show up, like when we have the board meetings, there are security people everywhere. There's at least 200 or 300 people on the ground surrounding us when they have these board meetings. And the ships in the sky, they're there, and they're totally. There's no such thing as an ET ship that's not armed on either side. There's a Cold War going on right now, and they're trying to avoid a hot war, but the hot war is going to happen when the disclosure thing starts to happen. That's when the hot wars start to break out. But the ETs, the good ETs, would love to be able to engage with humanity openly. That's what's being prevented by these damn written agreements that the U.S. government and some other governments have with the bad ETs. That's exactly the point. We want that to be overturned by the masses so that we can engage with the public.
There were some new findings released about the pyramids a couple months ago about these columns underneath. Did you guys remote view that to take a look and see what's going on?
No, we did do projects on the Great Pyramids of Giza, and we did definitively describe exactly how they were built, which was with AT technology under totally blind conditions with some of the best remote viewers anywhere. And it was very definitive. Our project on the Great Pyramid of Giza, you can see that on farsightprime.com. That one, I believe, is also up on YouTube. But that project was very definitive in terms of how the pyramids were actually built. But in terms of the internal microstructure of underneath stuff, the pyramids were not built for any type of useful purpose. They were created to produce a mystery. They were created to produce awe. And I'm sure that there's stuff underneath, but it's like all the ET tech has been scraped out of there. The issue is that the pyramids were built so that they can maintain a level of worship, a level of awe, a level of mystery. If you think about it, those huge structures, what practical purpose do they serve? They serve absolutely no practical purpose. They cannot shelter. They cannot help anybody. They're just these huge pyramids made of rock in the middle of nowhere. They're designed to produce shock and awe, to produce adherence by a population. And the ETs that organized them, they didn't care. They didn't care how many people died or suffered in the building of them. That wasn't part of the picture. So those are basically worthless worship items, the pyramids, and they still produce mystery to this day. They worked as that, and people are still trying to find meaning behind them. But the whole purpose is you're not supposed to be able to find meaning behind them. They're supposed to produce a mystery, and the mystery is supposed to be ongoing forever. And they did indeed accomplish that.
Do you think that most of the ancient structures around the planet were produced for the same reason?
Yes, we have done countless procedures, countless projects on all of them. For example, we went to India and we did the Kailasa temple in the Elleron caves. And the Kailasa temple is very interesting. There's a slope. It's made out of basalt, which is like harder than granite. Basalt is like one of the hardest rocks, and it's a slope. And the Kailasa temple is an extremely intricate carving into the rock, meaning they did not assemble it. They carved the rock on the slope. So the temple is actually built inside the rock. And basically, if you know what 3D printing is, where you have a computer orchestrating how materials are put down to construct very complicated shapes. Well, this is like a laser version of 3D printing, where instead of laying down material, you're cutting material away. So the entire temple, which it starts on level and then goes down, was carved out of the entire rock. It was the entire temple, which is huge, was not made of pieces that were brought in and assembled. It was all out of one giant rock that's inside. They carved the entire thing out. And you can also say, well, then where is the rock that was taken out? It's nowhere to be found. There is no rock that you can see that was taken away. There should be huge mountains of rock that was taken away, refuse. And it's not there. So what we did was we did a project on the Kailasa temple. There was a ship above it, and it was like beaming energy things down and essentially vaporizing the rock inside this giant slab of basalt. Now, to this day, you need specialized tools to cut basalt that has specialized hardened blades and things like that. It's really, really hard. And back in the days when that temple was made, none of those tools existed. And even if they did, they couldn't have carved that level of complexity into the rock. Now, mainstream archaeologists have these crazy ideas that this was done by such and such of a ruler. It doesn't matter what kind of ruler you say, nobody could have done that. They could not have built that. Same with the pyramids. But we have gone through Göbekli Tepe. We have a whole project on Göbekli Tepe. We've gone the Nazca lines out in Peru. We've done projects on, what are those Easter Island megaliths, those Easter Island like statues?
Yeah.
And we've done projects on all of the major mysteries. So we've resolved how those things were actually built. So yeah, that's part of the Farsight Prime library.
That's fascinating about the Nazca lines. How did they do those?
They were done by ships, and they were playing. Actually, they were having fun. They were constructing these lines. Now, those lines can't be seen on the ground. They have to be seen from above. So you can sort of ask, well, then how could those ancient people have built those things in the first place, since you can only see them if you're flying high above them? So that's what they were doing. But they had ships that were going over and sort of assembling all that stuff.
Well, if people want to find out more about what you're up to, should they just go to farsight.org or go to your YouTube channel?
Actually, all of the above. Farsight.org is the regular website that we have, and there's good introductions of what we do, and a lot of printed material is there on the remote viewing process and things like that. And then there is the YouTube channel, which is Farsight, which is the largest remote viewing venue in YouTube. And then there's, of course, the main library of everything that we do, which is on farsightprime.com. So those three things. And we were also one of the ones that pioneered how to take video recordings on demand in the middle of the day of cloaked ET spaceship. And typically, out of a typical 15-minute period in the middle of the day, we were getting 30 ET spaceships using this specialized stuff. So that can be found on farsight.org. But if you want to see examples of this happening, because people were always saying, well, do the ETs even really exist? So we had to sort of crack that by saying, okay, we'll show you how to take pictures of them. They're all cloaked. So if you go to my Instagram page, which is Courtney Brown Farsight, all one word, no spaces, Courtney Brown Farsight. We have a whole bunch of videos that we did, and on farsight.org, we go through the explicit techniques for how to do those. This is for cloaked ships. We tell you what camera we use, what lens we use, the way we had to get it modified to shoot infrared at high frame rates, 120 frames a second. And then we have lots of examples. And on Instagram at farsightprime.com, which is on your phone, you can see some of them right now.
I'm glad you brought that up because I'd like to know if anybody's producing a camera that can be used to do that without having to go get one and then have it modified.
I don't know. We use Panasonic Lumix GH6s and GH7s. And the reason we use those is that they can shoot at 120 frames per second in 4K. Now you have to use 4K or better because you have to shoot wide angle, because the ships typically travel at 20,000 miles an hour. That's 32,000 kilometers per hour. Now you can have the Titanic fly right over your head and you're not going to see it if it's flying that fast. So you have to shoot it at fast frame rates. So we take the Panasonic Lumix GH6s and GH7s, and we ship them out to a company called LifePixel, lifepixel.com, and they take the filter off on top that's on top of the sensor. So every sensor, every photographic sensor has a filter that's on top of it that screens out infrared and ultraviolet. So they take that off and throw it away, and they give you back the camera. So we had that done. So when that happens, we have what they call a full spectrum camera, and then we use special filters on top of the lens to hone in on the specific infrared frequency that we want, usually a deep infrared. And that's what we use when we shoot. And we shoot wide angle because the ships are going so fast. And we have to shoot 4K because when we're in post, meaning when we're editing it in, say, Adobe Premiere, we have to be able to zoom in without losing resolution. So that's why we have to shoot 4K with a good camera. And then when we're editing, we zoom in. We can, even without zooming in, you can see the ships flying across. But we want to zoom in to see what they look like and to see what they're doing. Anyway, you can see lots of examples on Farsight Prime and on Instagram at Courtney Brown Farsight.
Do you have any idea what the size of those crafts are?
We have seen the ones that are so big, they cover the entire sky, right over my house. About a week ago, for example, I didn't video record this, but I was out on my deck about a week ago, and this huge mean-ass ET ship was flying across the sky, and it was being followed by a smaller ET ship, like chased. And then the big one turned and came in directly in my direction towards my house. And then the smaller one quickly pivoted and came and positioned itself between me and the big ship. And then it looked like it physically rammed the big ship, not hard enough to like break them, but either it got really close or it physically connected. It was like, as far as I could see, it looked like it connected, but it probably just got really close. And it stopped the ET, the big ship. And then the big ET ship backed off a little and then zoomed off in another direction. So that was, and that just happened. And I did not have, special optics or anything. I was just watching it. And that was a situation where it was very clear that we're protected, because we couldn't do that. We would be killed and snuffed out in a second if we were not protected. The military, if it was not divided, it was somebody helping us, somebody protecting us. If the military didn't have somebody protecting us, we would have been snuffed out in a second. On the ET side, the exact same thing. So, anyway, what was your question again?
I was just curious if you knew the size of these ships that you're
Oh,
recording.
yeah, that was why I answered it that way. Some of them are big. We have seen ones that basically cover the sky, but most of them are small, relatively small, and we have to zoom in to see them. But the one the other night, though, there was a big one and a small one.
Do you think the majority of them are pilotless ships, kind of like drones just patrolling the skies?
The one, when they had tens of thousands of ships that showed up starting November 18th for a couple months, I'm assuming most of those had no people inside. Just for security purposes, just for safety purposes.
Well, before we wrap it up today, Dr. Brown, can you leave us with a last positive message?
The cavalry is coming. We're really getting, so there may be some hard times that are coming, but the whole purpose is to save everybody. That's the whole purpose. And we are finally at the point where it looks like this is the crunch time. This is the time when we're trying to really take down the prison walls and free everybody. So there may be some tough times coming, but it will be worth it. The cavalry is on the way.
Dr. Brown, thank you for your message. Thank you for coming back. And hopefully the next time you are back, we will be talking about a post-prison planet world.
Yeah, that would be great.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.